Um, Welcome. Ian, you're here. I just logged into, or just, I believe we're on Facebook Live right now. I think I went live about 10 seconds ago. How are you doing, Ian?
Kind of shaky today. Had a family member pass away yesterday.
Well,
Friday, technically, but found out yesterday. So
I'm sorry to hear about that.
yeah, thanks.
Okay. Yeah, you're looking a little rough. Mr. Gurdjieff said use death as a reminder. So, we're all mortal. We're all going that way. At the very end of Tales, in the chapter again from the author, he said if he could do anything, he would implant an organ within us that made us aware and cognizant of our death. So, using times like this to become aware of our own mortality, that, we only have a short time on this planet, and repair the past, prepare for the future, while we have a body, while we still can. Karen, how are you doing down in Mexico? Oh, your microphone's off.
Okay, now you can hear me?
Now I can hear you, yeah.
I don't know if I'll be able to be here the whole time because today is a huge, huge fiesta of thousands of crazy, semi-drunk people parading with floats with terrible speakers at the sound of, I can't even explain it. It's crazy. It's called Los Locos, and it
Los
is
Locos.
crazy. So if the ambient noise gets too loud, I'll have to say goodbye because it's literally crazy.
Yeah. Okay. That brings up an interesting story. I went to bed early Thursday night. I think it was Thursday night. And then at 12:30 at night, suddenly all these horns started ringing, and they woke me up. And the horns kept on going for about half an hour. This is Toronto, but I guess the Raptors won the championships, and people went crazy. But I was obviously fast asleep, so I didn't really care about it. But so yeah, if you have to go, just if it gets too noisy, you can always mute your microphone. Brian, sorry,
I just want to say that, excuse me for eating, but I had to eat something or I wasn't going to feel well. So excuse that.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all.
Okay, Brian, how are you doing in Scottsdale, Arizona?
I'm doing well. Everything's good.
How's the inner work going? Any questions on it? Any comments?
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of, I'm paying a lot more attention to food still.
Oh, okay.
I'm trying to use, every meal as like an opportunity to, really do the inner work, and, even just simple things like, waiting or eating slower, when I'm really hungry. Like, I've never done any type of fast or anything like that, but I can see, the efforts that are involved when you're just, you're trying to slow down and trying to be mindful, especially when you're hungry or in a rush,
Yeah.
That's been real helpful for me.
Well, we're actually going to briefly touch upon that with remorse of conscience. Whoops. I'm not sure what happened here. Oh, I thought for a minute I disappeared, but I think my screen just flipped into a different screen. I've got too many windows open. I'm going to share the screen briefly to remind us why we're doing this work. This comes from Roger Lipsy's Gurdjieff Reconsidered. The original was spoken in French to one of Mr. Gurdjieff's students during the Nazi occupation of Paris in the Second World War. And I find it's a really good grounding. It's a really good thing to begin our work with. I wish to be. And Mr. Gurdjieff said there is nothing more powerful than a wish, but a wish has to be properly done. I wish to be. I can be. I have the right to be. I have the ability to be. I swear to myself that this will never be for my personal profit, but to help others. I wish to be to help others. This is to be understood as a vow. So, all the inner work that we do, we don't just do it for ourselves. We do it for our family. We do it for our array of creation, so our grandparents and our great-grandparents and so on. And we do it for the earth, and we do it for ourselves and humanity. I'll talk about that in a little bit when I go on to remorse of conscience, because there are aspects of Mr. Gurdjieff's quotes on remorse of conscience that feed into this. But let's just begin by recognizing that we are not just working for ourselves, we are working for humanity and great nature and the earth herself. And last week, I introduced an alternate version of J.G. Bennett's 60-point exercise. And I'm going to do that again today. I want to get comfortable enough that I can switch back and forth between the two, but I still have my sheet of paper in front of me if I mess up. It's just an interesting addition to the sort of catalog of exercises that I'm trying to organize in terms of these teachings. So, just begin by becoming aware of the effect of gravity on your body. Notice those pressure points, perhaps underneath your sitting bones, perhaps under your thighs, perhaps under your feet. And notice the tension. Notice how gravity is pushing you down on those pressure points. Then become aware of the sensation of balance. Become aware of how your head is balanced on your shoulders, balanced on your spine, balanced on your pelvic bones. And then become aware of the atmospheric pressure around you. If it's raining and dark, the atmospheric pressure will be lower. If it's sunny and beautiful like it is here today in Toronto, the atmospheric pressure will be higher, and depending on your elevation as well. Then try to become aware of certain internal sensations, perhaps the inside of your throat, your esophagus, your stomach. Perhaps become aware of your bladder and colon. And then just become aware of the outside of your body, perhaps the touch of clothing or the air that touches your face or the hair on your head or any jewelry you may be wearing. Really try to ground yourself in the sensation of self. Try to be aware of as many of these as possible. So to become aware of gravity, balance, atmospheric pressure, internal, external temperature, sensations, really strive to work those parts of your brain that are designed and tuned into this awareness, because there is a part of the brain that monitors gravity. There's another part that monitors balance. There's another part that monitors internal and external temperature. And what we are doing is we are making these unconscious awarenesses, I suppose, conscious. So our subconscious mind was aware of them, and every act of mindfulness is a harmonization of our conscious and our subconscious mind. So becoming aware of them, we harmonize those two aspects of our being. Now I'm going to begin with J.G. Bennett's alternate version for the 60-point exercise. And I would like you to breathe in awareness and then breathe out tension to all of these points. And we actually start with a very interesting point in the body, because we start with the mind's eye. So, if you can visualize your mother's face, if you can imagine a blue sky, if you can have a conversation in your head with someone, those all occur in your mind's eye. It's where we think, where we imagine, where we speak to ourselves, where we visualize. So breathing in awareness and breathing out tension to your mind's eye. And then breathing in awareness and breathing out tension for your right eye. Breathing in awareness and breathing out tension for your right ear. The right side of your neck. Your right shoulder joint. Your right upper arm. Your right elbow. Your right lower arm. Your right wrist. The top of your right hand. Your right thumb. Index finger. Middle finger. Fourth finger. Baby finger. The palm of your right hand. The outside of your upper right leg. Your right hip. Your entire upper right leg. Your knee, your right knee. Your right lower leg. Your right ankle. Your right heel. The top of your right foot. Your right big toe. Your right second toe. Your right middle toe. Your right fourth toe. Your right baby toe. The bottom of your right foot. Now reversing this process and breathing in awareness and breathing out tension to the bottom of your left foot. Your left baby toe. Your left fourth toe. Your left middle toe. Your left second toe. Your left big toe. Your the top of your left foot. Your left heel. Your left ankle. Your left lower leg. Your left knee. Your left upper leg. Your left hip. The outside of your left upper leg. Your left palm. your left hip, your left palm, your left baby finger, your left fourth finger, your left middle finger, your left index finger, your left thumb, the top of your left hand, your left wrist, your left lower arm, your left elbow, your left upper arm, your left shoulder, the left side of your neck, your left ear, your left eye, and then back to your mind's eye. And then I like to add just moving our awareness down the right side of our body with our out breath, and moving our awareness up the left side with our in breath. Moving the awareness down the right side of our body with our out breath, and bringing it back up the left side with our in breath. Just circle around your body for a few seconds, not too long, with your breath. Just down the right side, up the left, circling around, breathing out down the right side and breathing up the left. And then allow your attention to rest. And then let's finish with the collected state exercise. As the earth has an atmosphere, so too we have an atmosphere. But our atmosphere can easily be dispersed in the direction of our thoughts, in the direction of our feelings, dispersed by our sensations. And what we want to do is we want to collect our atmosphere, draw it close to us, perhaps a meter, meter and a half. Try to become aware of the boundary of your atmosphere. Keep it close to you, collect it. And again, you keep it still by keeping your thoughts still, by keeping your feelings still, emotions, and by keeping your sensations still. So collect your atmosphere, keep it still, become aware of the boundary of your atmosphere. And in a moment, I'm going to count from 1 up to 3. And when I get to 3, just breathe it in. And then as you breathe out, imagine that something remains, that something remains within you that then settles and helps to coat and coalesce your inner being. 1, 2, 3. Breathe your atmosphere in, and then as you breathe out, imagine that something remains. And then silently in your mind, repeat after me. May results from this exercise be transubstantiated within me for my being. And then just allow your attention to rest. The 2 versions of the J.G. Bennett, I think I just slightly mixed it up. But the one version you come to your palm and then you move to your chest, solar plexus, upper back, lower back, hip. The other one, the one we did today, you go from your palm to the outside of your right leg, to your right hip, to your entire upper right leg, and it moves down. So it's interesting to observe the difference between the two of them and to try to reverse engineer, to think about why are they different and what does one achieve as opposed to the other. So just things to think about. So how is everyone doing today? Any questions, any comments on the inner work? Any comments on how the inner work is going with you? One thing I haven't really vocally emphasized, but I've emphasized it, is the best inner work is the inner work that we choose for ourselves. The inner exercises that we can create. And a lot of people in the Gurdjieff movement go, no, 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 don't do that. But if we didn't allow that to happen, Brian wouldn't be focusing on his food. He's taken personal responsibility for his own inner development. And he heard Karen speak of some inner work that she does around food. And he's adapted that to his own life, to his own circumstances. And this is the best kind of inner work to do, to think of where we ourselves can work. Can I work on food? Can I work on relationships? Can I work on my breathing? Can I just work on being present here in this moment, aware of my breath, aware of my body? And so we can adapt things to our life depending on the circumstances, depending on the nature, depending on what is going on. And this is something that I always encourage, and I have always encouraged, is for people to experiment and try to develop their own inner exercises. I know that for myself, over the years, I've developed hundreds of them, some of which worked extraordinarily well at the time and some of which didn't. But, as with all experimentation, you take what works and you keep that. And if it doesn't work, you move on. But this is not a cookie cutter system where we're all the same. And without really being in our real presences and sitting down and being physically present and being in a real deep connection as a community, we're all around the globe. And so it's important to improvise. We all have different chief features. We have different faults. We have different corns, different tender spots. And that's where we should be focusing our work on. Any questions, any comments, anything anyone want to add? Ian, you mentioned that you have recently lost a family member. The pain that you're feeling and the sadness and despair can actually be turned into remorse of conscience. I've done this, when I've been grieving. There's that sorrow and that lament and that hurt and that aching. And, if it was someone that you've done a lot of interactions with and you can go back and think of those moments, whoops, it's telling me the studio is disconnecting and reconnecting. That's probably going to cut us off from Facebook. I'm not sure. Let me just go to Facebook and see if we still seem to, or no, we don't, or do we don't? We still seem to be live. I don't know exactly what happened. And I just got a message from Angelica. She's working today. She'll be back. next week. Any comments? Okay, I'll move on. Going to the remorse of conscience. Whoops, this is the wrong one. Stop sharing. I've got it listed as another document. Whoops. That's here, remorse of conscience. So this is continuing from where we left off last week. So I read two quotes last week. I tried to explain them. Remorse of conscience. This is Mr. Gurdjieff. You do not think of it. You continue to act the egotist. Your question proves it. So have remorse of conscience for the future. Repair the past for the sake of the future. You are obliged to work for your children. This idea held in you can play the role of a factor at times for remembering yourself, at times for giving you strength for the future. And with it, you will be able to repair the past. You do not like this truth, but I tell you it as an example. There are a thousand other things. This is an example, but you can find something else to furnish you with material capable of making you find remorse of conscience. Only this remorse can crystallize the factors which will serve in you remembering yourself. Will crystallize the factors which will serve in you remembering yourself. The rest cannot. Only remorse of conscience can. It is here that you talk, and afterwards in life you forget everything. In life you have 6 days, 23 hours, and 50 minutes. And there they had 10 minutes. But going back to this, only this remorse can crystallize the factors which will serve you in remembering yourself. So when we start to look at our past, when we try to heal our past in order to prepare for the future, this creates a degree of remorse, and we can use this remorse to bring us back to this moment, to remember ourselves. Let me just go back. So here he talks about to repair the past for the sake of the future. You are obliged to work for your children. This idea held in you can play the role of a factor at times for remembering yourself. So, you know, when Mr. Gurdjieff also has said elsewhere that when you become a parent, you no longer own your life. Your life then has to be in service of your children. But as a corollary, he also said that we owe our parents a debt we cannot repay, and we have to try. So our debt to our parents and our obligation to our children can both serve as factors for remorse of conscience. So to repair the past, you know, to go, you know, for instance, with my children, there were times, you know, when I was looking after them, I got a little upset, I got a little aggravated, where I wasn't as focused as I should have been, I wasn't as present, I wasn't as aware. I can actually go back to those moments and relive them and re-experience them, but from the vantage point of now. So to see what I didn't do, or to see what I did do that I shouldn't have done, and to use the mind, to use the mind's eye, to use our imaginative faculty, the faculty for, creating thoughts and images in my mind and remembering sequences of events. I can go back into the past, and if I express the proper remorse of conscience, I can begin to change. Not the actual events that happened in the past, but the interpretation of them, my understanding of them, my relationship with them. And last week I talked about how Mr. Gurdjieff said that we have the data within ourselves for remorse of conscience. And I said that remorse of conscience was actually broken into two components. One of the components was organic shame. And organic is physical body, and it's also planetary body. So organic shame is a very specific quality and feeling that we had as children. And we can still experience organic shame today. We can get flushed in the cheeks and hot, and we can, get tears in our eyes and various things. But the truest and purest expression of organic shame will have happened before the age of 8. Organic shame, in one sense, is an emotion. It's a feeling. Conscience is emotion at the higher level. Consciousness and conscience, that's in another quote later on. We'll get to that. But through the use of this, we can go back into our past, recall a moment. And again, what I was about to say there was Mr. Gurdjieff, in Views from the Real World, talks about feelings. And he said that our feeling center is pretty well complete by about the age of 8. Imagine a sack of potatoes, and you put a potato in, and another potato in, and another potato in, and another potato in. And then at the age of 8, you tie a knot on the end of the sack, and only those feelings that are in the sack will you be able to feel. If you haven't felt it by the age of 8, you won't feel it. But between the age of 8 and approximately 16 to 18, we can move the relative positions of the various potatoes in that sack around. We can't add new potatoes, but we can move things around. So we're not carved in stone from the age of 8. That happens around the age of 18, though we can develop new emotions. This was one of the purposes of the Gurdjieff movements, the sacred temple dances. You'll do a dance and you'll open your arms, and suddenly you'll become aware of this feeling. And the different postures can engender new feelings. But otherwise, it's pretty well difficult to acquire a new feeling after the age of 8. And so this is why, going back before the age of 8, recalling ourselves as a child, perhaps through hypnosis, through guided meditation, recalling a moment when we felt acute organic shame. And it doesn't have to be objective shame. It could be a complete misreading of the situation. What really counts is our internal perception of it. And as a hypnotherapist and as an NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, NLP practitioner, I know that when we begin to recall feeling states, when we begin to recall memories that involve feeling states, the way we do it is by re-feeling those feelings within ourselves. So when done properly, we can go back and harvest experiences of organic shame that we experienced before the age of 8. That physical, the red face, the tears, and if we do it properly, we can harness that power, harness that feeling. And then I also talked about remorse of conscience. Remorse of conscience is more of an adult awareness, and it's more of a head-brain awareness. For instance, perhaps you missed a deadline to send in an application to go to a particular school. And when you realize that mistake, you had such a profound feeling of remorse. You bring that awareness with your head brain of remorse together with the organic shame and the memory of organic shame. And by combining these two, we create remorse of conscience. And if we can bring that feeling, that remorse of conscience, into our past, into specific memories from our past, we can begin to free those memories. We can begin to repair the past. I'm going to just move down then. Only this remorse can crystallize the factors which will serve you in remembering yourself. And here is another dimension of remorse, is that it involves suffering. And one of Mr. Gurdjieff's most important phrases was conscious labors and intentional suffering. And through the application and wielding of remorse of conscience, we actually force ourselves to intentionally suffer. And this suffering, this remorse of conscience, has the power to crystallize things within us. It also has the power to uncrystallize things. So to go back and repair the past, we uncrystallize, so to speak, the wobbles and the mistakes of that. And then we crystallize the new understanding. We don't change the events, we change our perception of the events. So one that I've used before, when I was 19 years old, screaming at my dad, and just saying things I shouldn't have said, and then experiencing the remorse and going and looking at it through his eyes. But to bring that up is to suffer, and it's to intentionally suffer. And through the power of that remorse of conscience, the power of that suffering, we can actually use this as a force, as a power, as an energy to go back and decrystallize those mistakes we made and recrystallize them on a better basis. So I don't change the scenario with my father, but I grow my awareness of it by noticing the sadness I saw on his face, the slump on his shoulders, and noticing what I can see from the outside, and then entering into his experience, and imagine seeing myself as 19-year-old son just going off the rails and really yelling and trying to experience inside the pain that I caused him in that moment. And the pain to experience that again is suffering. So it all comes back to suffering. Unlike Buddhism, we are not trying to alleviate suffering. Rather, we are trying to harness suffering to help us to evolve. And of all the different forms of suffering, remorse of conscience is the most powerful. So we'll move on to the next quote. Questioner. I lack an impulse for my work. I don't succeed in approaching my work in a satisfactory manner unless I feel a certain urge, which can only come to me from a clear realization of my present situation and my present nothingness. I have understood that very clearly, and that made me understand that I ought to have remorse of conscience for this nothingness. But I can't go further than this statement. What can I do to have remorse of conscience? I love Mr. Gurdjieff. There are 7 aspects, but he only tells us 1. And so the rest of us think, what are the other 6? Gurdjieff, that question carries with it 7 aspects. Not 1, but 7. 1, I will tell you. Every man, when he comes into the world, comes here for certain reasons. Think about this. We're not just born haphazardly. Every man, when he comes into the world, comes here for certain reasons. There are causes, that is to say, outside forces have created him. These forces perhaps were not obliged to give you life. Are you glad to be alive? Is life worth something to you? Well then, if you are alive and glad of it, you should pay something in return. For example, I see your mother here. And this was again at a meeting in Paris during the Nazi occupation. And this man was there with his mother. For example, I see your mother here. But for her, you would never have come into the world. It is to her that you owe your life. If you are glad to live, you must repay her. You are of age now. The time has come to settle your debts. So, again, what I've talked about in the past, repairing the past with our parents. We owe our parents our life, so we must begin to repay it. One of the chief causes of your being alive is your mother. It is because of her that you have your pleasures and that you have possibilities of developing yourself. One of the reasons, one of the aspects of your coming into this world is then your mother. And I ask you, have you begun to pay your debts to her? Questioner, no. Gurdjieff, there are still 6 other aspects, but I speak to you of one aspect. Begin then by this first aspect, your mother. Whoops. Repay her, even if she is objectively bad. And here as an aside, one woman asked Mr. Gurdjieff, but what happens if my dad was a scoundrel and left my mother when I was a baby? And Mr. Gurdjieff said, then it's even more important to objectively love your parent. So repay her. Even if she is objectively bad, she is your mother. And how can you pay her? You should unify her life. But instead of that, what do? You make her life more difficult. You unnerve her. You irritate her. Unconsciously, remorse of conscience could flow from that. Take the year that just passed. Remember, often you have been very bad. You are mad, French word for shit. You have not fulfilled your obligations. If you have understood this, remorse can begin in you. This is but one aspect. I could explain to you 6 others, but forget them. Before knowing them, begin with this one. For the past 2 years, how many times have you been bad, very bad to her? Remember this and try to repair the past with your future in the present. It is a very difficult thing. If you forget, if you do not do it, it is your fault, and doubly your fault. First, you are to blame for the past, and you are a second time to blame for not repairing it today. So we have that double remorse of conscience. I'm just going to stop sharing this briefly. One of the most important, it's not really a book because it's available online, and it was more of a PDF, and I think someone has finally published it, but Gurdjieff's Paris Wartime Meetings. It floats around with different names, transcripts of meetings from 1935 to 45, various different names. And I first came across this in around 2005. And it was one of the most incredible adjuncts to the Gurdjieff teachings. I would put In Search of the Miraculous and Views from the Real World, which should be read together as a unit first. And then I would put these wartime meetings second in terms of the information that they give. And I read it in 2004. And I realized that for the previous 40 years, I had hated my mother. My mother had some real horrific experiences when she was young that broke her. And I was really raised by, a 13, 14-year-old who was far more self-absorbed, but she was my mother. And I hadn't given her the respect and the honor that she deserved by being one of the immediate causes of my being, by being the next level up in my own personal ray of creation. And so what I did was I undertook a program that I created myself to make myself love my mother again. And I have to admit, it wasn't easy. My mother could be a very disagreeable, very mean, very nasty person at times. But I understand it in terms of the violence and the experiences she had when she was younger. And I remember phoning her one Thursday night. And my whole goal in phoning her was at the very end of the conversation, I was going to say, I love you. And I hadn't said that to my mother in decades. And so I was talking, and I could feel my hand beginning to shake. I could feel my body just, entering into, a very stressed out state. And I said, I love you, and I hung up the phone. And the next time I talked to her, I didn't hang it up quite so fast. And then I got to the point where it became easy for me to say I love you to my mother. And then it got to the point where it actually became real, where I really began to love my mother again. Not in spite of her flaws, but her whole being, her flaws and all. And, after that, I did some hypnosis work, and I realized that, in a very real way, I wouldn't have been here if my mother hadn't have put her foot down and said no. When I was in the womb, my mother contracted German measles, and the doctor wanted to abort me. And my mother was the one who said that no, she wasn't going to do it, that she felt I was fine. And I owed her such a debt for that one specific experience, and also all sorts of other experiences. Even though I didn't have a happy childhood, my mother kept me clothed. She always made sure I was fed. And so it was a real struggle, but it was well worth it. A real struggle to really try to institute what Mr. Gurdjieff was talking about in terms of remorse of conscience, in terms of the duty we have to our parents, in terms of what we owe our parents. And I said, that was like 2004. My mother died in 2012, and she started to get dementia in the last few years of her life. She never forgot who I was, and she never forgot who her grandchildren, but she couldn't remember what happened the day before. She lost her ability to form new memories. But I was so glad that I did that. And I got so comfortable telling her that I loved her that my children started saying it to her automatically. And, bye, Granny, I love you, Granny, which was so heartwarming for me, considering the years that I had closed myself off inside this. Oh, I don't like my mother. She's, one of the worst things that happened to me. And if it wasn't for her, my family would still be together, and various different things. And so this was my own application of remorse of conscience, specifically devoted to my mother. Then I began to remember some of the times when I screamed at my mother, when I told her various names, when I did various things. At a certain point, right after my parents' divorce, I was somewhat cruel to my mother. And, going back and trying to relive those memories through her eyes, seeing what an ungrateful son I was. She gave me this existence. She was the cause of my arising. And she, gave me life. She protected me. She saved me. When I was in her womb from what the doctor wanted to abort me. Okay, I disappeared for a bit there. Now everyone else has disappeared. Are you, there you are. You're all coming back. Okay.
I can see you.
Good. It's only, I can see you, Brian, and I can see Karen. Ian is still, I'm not sure what happened to him. So that's my own personal experience with remorse of conscience. And it was, like I said, one of the best things I ever did, because I got to the point where I really loved my mother. The last 3 months of her life, she was in a nursing home, and I visited her 6 out of 7 days. And I would spend 2 to 3 hours with her, playing all sorts of music that I got from the 40s, late 30s, 40s, the wartime music that she would have grown up with. And it was interesting because when in the nursing home, one of the people in there, one of the orderlies, or, I forget what they're called, said to me, "You must really love your mother." And I said, "Why?" And they said, "You're always visiting her and no one visits." And I have to admit, her roommate never had one visit the entire time I was there. It's like their families parked them in these nursing homes and then would show up for Mother's Day or Father's Day or whatever. And, it was because I went through this process of remorse of conscience. Let me see. I'll bring this back up. I think we've lost Facebook, unfortunately. I can't be my technical wizard and talk at the same time. I'm not quite there yet. So another quote: "One needs fire. Without fire, there will never be anything. This fire is suffering, voluntary suffering, without which it is impossible to create anything. One must prepare. One must know what will make one suffer, and when it is there, make use of it. Only you can prepare. Only you know what makes you suffer, makes the fire which cooks, cements, crystallizes, does. Suffer by your defects, in your pride, in your egoism. Remind yourself of the aim. Without prepared suffering, there is nothing. For by as much as one is conscious, there is no more suffering, no further process, nothing. That is why, with your conscience, you must prepare what is necessary. You owe nature. The food you eat, which nourishes your life. Getting back to what Brian was saying, what Karen said in a previous meeting about really focusing and becoming mindful of your food. You owe to nature the food you eat, which nourishes your life. You must pay for these cosmic substances. You have a debt, an obligation to repay by conscious work. Do not eat like an animal, but render to nature for what she has given you. Nature, your mother. Work, a drop, accumulated during days, months, years, centuries, perhaps will give results. So let's just go back to do not eat like an animal. Eat consciously. Mr. Gurdjieff didn't like people talking when he ate. He considered eating to be one of the most important moments for remembering ourselves, for self-remembering. The awareness of the food, the awareness of our body, the awareness of the tastes, and also, a degree of gratitude and thankfulness. And so we repay nature by becoming more conscious. We repay nature. Nature has got us, this far. It is up to us to do the rest. But we owe a huge debt. A debt we cannot repay to not just our parents and our grandparents, but to great nature herself. And so this is, one of the lines of work that I talked about, that I like to invoke at the beginning of inner exercises. We're not just doing this work for ourselves, for our fellow human beings, but we are doing it for great nature, for the earth herself. So when we are more conscious, when we are more grounded, when we are more centered, we have an effect on the world around us, and we can bring those qualities, so to let them seep out of us into the world around us and be a force, a positive force in this world. But it's the use of remorse of conscience, it's the use of suffering that helps us to do this. The other day, I was actually thinking about the plastics and plastic bags in the ocean. And then I thought about that week and the last week and the various times throughout the week that I used a plastic bag without really even focusing on it, without having any kind of remorse of conscience. Do I need to use this plastic bag? Will it end up in a whale's stomach? Will it end up in the ocean? I can do remorse of conscience that way. I can do it through recycling. I can, many different ways, different exercises that I can create in my own life. And this is, okay, I keep on reconnecting, but I don't think it affects the Zoom. But I think, okay, sorry. I think I have to go and buy a cord that I can plug this directly into an Ethernet connection. That should cut down a lot of this. So any comments so far? Any questions? I think I have one more quote.
I've definitely noticed the thing about plastics. that changes it. It just I don't know, like even like just being more conscious of recycling in general. Like You know, even just the last week I went into the grocery store. I didn't do it, but I almost bought some of those, those bags that you can buy, that are, that you just reuse them instead of using the plastic bags.
Yeah, but to do it, and Karen's just saying she's leaving. We'll just say bye to Karen. She has to go. Yeah, I mean, there are many different ways. I mean, the thing is, as well, is that we want to do this as a cleansing process. I know a lot of people in the environmental movement, and a lot of them are just so filled with hostility. They're filled with negativity. And, I understand the environment is really important, but to be so broken by the crimes of humanity is one thing. To experience remorse of conscience is something else. Remorse of conscience is to repair our past in order to make our future better. So it's not about harnessing rage. It's not about harnessing anger. It's not about harnessing guilt. So for instance, if I fail to do something, if, I accidentally put plastics where they don't belong or whatever, I don't beat myself up with guilt, but I try to harness remorse of conscience in order to deal with it. So to think back on what I haven't done, and I can extend this back even farther. My father had a PhD in geochemistry. He was a geologist. I know that one of the most environmentally destructive things that we can do is mining. I don't know when it was, sometime in the last year, a slurry pit caved or whatever, and the slurry went down into a river in Brazil and killed all sorts of people, contaminated the river. That's how toxic mines are. And as a child, the world that I grew up in, the house that I lived in, my education, it was all paid through the mining industry, through, in a sense, a raping of this planet, through some very negative, destructive practices. So I've also gone back into that part of my lineage, my father and the connection with mining, to express a degree of remorse of conscience as well. So we can think about our own lives. We can think about events in our lives, relationships that we have with people, and bring this quality of remorse of conscience to bear in order to begin to change it, to heal it. As Mr. Gurdjieff has said, if we do not repair our past, today will be exactly like yesterday, and tomorrow will be exactly like today. If we want tomorrow to be different from today, we have to go and repair our past. And we do this through remorse of conscience. I'm going to bring up, I think, one final quote here. And here he said as well, work, a drop, accumulated during days, months, years, centuries, perhaps will give results. This is like the stalactite I've talked about, dripping from the roof of a cave. One drop does nothing, 2 drops, 3 drops, maybe 1,000, maybe 10,000. So you don't just sit down, do 5 minutes of remorse of conscience, and expect things to change. Remorse of conscience, it's like having a cavity in your mouth and touching that cavity with your tongue. It's painful, and it's something that you have to come back to again and again and again, and you've got to learn how to consciously suffer. Conscience. In ordinary life, the concept conscience And this is actually in Search of the Miraculous. All the other quotes were from the transcripts of the wartime meetings. In ordinary life, the concept conscience is taken too simply, as if we had a conscience. Actually, the concept conscience in this, actually the concept conscience in the sphere of emotions is equivalent to the concept consciousness in the sphere of the intellect. And we have no consciousness, and as we have no consciousness, we have no conscience. Actually, let me just stop this for a second. Let me share. So I don't know if I can, excuse me about this, whoops. I'm trying to bring up an old diagram. Oops. Okay, just give me a second. This diagram is, where is it? It's not appearing. It's the diagram I've shown you before of the, I'm not sure why this is not showing up in my ability to share Zoom. Let's try again. There it is. Okay, so if we look over at the right-hand side, and let me bring a pen. Let's see if I can, okay. So we can talk about conscience, and these are all, I don't know why this is green, but these are all located here. Hydrogen 12. Hydrogen Me12 is the hydrogen of full, proper, objective, conscious awareness. Hydrogen So12 in the octave of food is conscience. It is the emotion evolved up to the point of hydrogen 12. Hydrogen 12 is the realm of the real I. It's the realm of the witness, the realm of the observer, the realm of our true self, which according to Willem Nyland, one of Mr. Gurdjieff's students, in most people is just, it exists as a few cells, and we've got to grow those cells and cultivate them. But at that level of objective consciousness, at the level of true conscious awareness of hydrogen 12, at that level, our head brain, that's consciousness. Our feeling brain is conscience, and our body brain is being. It's the full awareness of our physical body at a higher level with a higher awareness to our physical body. So as consciousness is to the octave of impressions, conscience is to the octave of air. As consciousness is to perceptions, conscience is to our feelings. So they both exist at that very high level. So let me just go back to where we were. So the concept conscience in the sphere of emotions is equivalent to the concept consciousness in the sphere of the intellect. And as we have no consciousness, we have no conscience. Basically, what he's really saying here is a machine lacks conscious awareness. A machine, when we exist in World 48 at the machine-like level, we lack any kind of self-reflectivity, and that's, conscious awareness. At a little lower level, at the higher level, it's consciousness. At the mindful level, it's the level of self-reflectivity. But when we are a machine, we completely lack that. And as a machine, we completely lack conscience. A machine can be taught a version of morality. A machine can be taught right and wrong. And this is why morality is different from culture to culture and era to era. In some places in the world, it's considered perfectly okay to have 4 wives, and in other places, that is an outrage. And this is morality. But according to Mr. Gurdjieff, conscience is the same everywhere. But conscience is really a higher power. It's something we have to grow, something we have to develop. Consciousness is a state in which a man knows all at once everything that he in general knows, and in which he can see how little he does not, I'll read this again. Consciousness is a state in which a man knows all at once everything that he in general knows, and in which he can see how little he does know and how many contradictions there are in what he knows. Conscience is a state in which a man feels all at once everything that he in general feels or can feel. And as everyone has within him thousands of contradictory feelings which vary from a deeply hidden realization of his own nothingness and fears of all kinds to the most stupid kind of self-conceit, self-confidence, self-satisfaction, and self-praise. So here he's saying that most people, it's actually fortunate they do not experience consciousness, because he says elsewhere it would drive a person crazy to experience all of their contradictory feelings and everything that he can feel in that moment. It's beyond what a normal person can do. Conscience is something that is a higher quality that we develop. So if you notice here, he said, he talks about things such as becoming aware of our own nothingness. This can actually be an aspect and an act of remorse of conscience. To be aware of my own nothingness, to be aware that everything I think about myself, all of the ideals I have about myself, all of the ways I pat myself on my back, they're really just inflating my ego, my sense of self-importance. And at the root, to become aware of my nothingness and to feel a degree of conscience, to feel a degree of remorse every time I catch myself. And the last 2 lines, and a stupid kind of self-conceit, or I catch myself in a stupid kind of self-confidence, or a stupid kind of self-satisfaction, and a stupid kind of self-praise. When we catch ourselves in those moments, to make ourselves feel bad, to harness remorse of conscience. So you're a student, you get an exam back and you got an A+, and it goes to your head and you think, wow. Tone it down, bring some remorse of conscience. Recognize that the wow and everything was a dimension of your ego. There are all sorts of people who've been walking around in Toronto in the last few days because the basketball team, the Raptors, won the championship. And it's a state of pure conceit. It's a state of ego. Their ego has been bolstered by a bunch of men playing a children's game. And they take it personally. And, that if you experience that, it is actually a place where you can bring remorse of conscience. You weren't one of the players. You weren't there on the game. You probably haven't followed the team. You're probably a Johnny-come-lately just because they got into the championships and whatever. And you could use this to really begin to explore your self-conceit, your pride, these various egocentric emotions. So we can bring remorse of conscience to bear many different ways on many different aspects of our life. And it's, where do we need to bring remorse of conscience? Do we need to bring it to our relationship with our parents? It's a good place to begin. We've all done things as children, particularly even as young as adults and teenagers, when we were aware enough to know that it was wrong, that we did to our parents. Perhaps we lied to them. Perhaps we ignored them, screamed at them, lashed out at them, bringing the organic shame and the remorse of conscience to bear, and then taking that feeling back into our past. And as I said, re-experiencing, reliving that moment with that feeling of remorse of conscience, going and re-experiencing that through our mother or father's eyes, to begin healing the past. But, we can also use remorse of conscience whenever we feel bad about ourselves. And it's not just like normal, generalized, I don't feel good about myself, but whenever, for instance, we notice our ego rearing its head, if we find ourselves overly proud, if we find ourselves feeling really good, if we love people patting us on the back and praising us, anything that reinforces our ego, anything that is a product of our ego, so the self-conceit, the self-love, all of that, those are all dirty things that are not worthy of a real person possessing. And so suddenly we find ourselves in that moment of pride. If we can bring a feeling of remorse of conscience to it, if we can recognize this state as the enemy, as something that we have to oppose. So there are many different ways we can introduce this into our life. Many different aspects of it. And I have to say that for myself, getting back to what I mentioned to Ian at the beginning of the meeting, when I've lost people I've really cared for, I suddenly realized that feeling that I was feeling, that loss, that sadness, that just grief and bereavement could actually be harnessed as a means of experiencing remorse of conscience. When my father died in 1984, his last girlfriend, a wonderful lady, she had actually been a nun and left the order, and she was a teacher in the Catholic school board, and she became a principal of a high school. But when she died, I felt this real deep sadness within myself. And there were certain aspects of her behavior that I had problems with when I was a teenager and young man. And so this sadness, this heartache, this grieving, I took this emotion and I went back into those moments, and I felt that emotion as the teenager, as the young man in his early 20s. And then I tried to enter into her reality and try to imagine how she perceived me in those situations, and bringing that remorse of conscience to bear. And in the days after her funeral, every time I felt that sadness and that sorrow come up within me, that breathing, I took that as a force. And then, I tried to repair the past. that I had with her. We had mostly a good relationship, but there were a few real touchy points. And so I used this sadness to go back and do my best to heal those specific touchy points where we clashed and where I didn't behave in the best possible way. So, we can begin to do these different things if we understand, the nature of remorse of conscience, if we understand the power of this feeling, if we understand how to harvest this feeling. Okay, it's 11:53. I don't think we're on Facebook anymore. I'll have to edit out the gaps in this. Any questions? Any comments?
There was something in the second quote that kind of struck me as unusual. I think it was about halfway down, maybe 2/3. Something along the lines of, when you're conscious, there is no suffering.
What he meant was that, I don't know if this is what he meant. My interpretation of this is that when a person exists at the level of the awakening state, when they exist and have awakened and grown and developed their real I, that at that level, they've moved, in a sense, beyond a lot of this darkness and a lot of this heaviness. And in order to get it up to that level, they've had to repair their past. They've had to work on all of this. So, I mean, it's not quite accurate, that quote, compared to some of the other things that he's also said, because, the fourth being Obligonian striving is that when we have repaid our past and repaid the debts for our existence, that at that point we should strive to lighten, and I believe the word he used was the sorrow of our endlessness or our creator. So we can bring a degree of suffering into ourselves at the conscious level and help existence, help creation. So he's saying something slightly different there. There he's saying that, until you really get to that level, you have lots and lots and lots of suffering in your own life. Suffer your defects, suffer the behaviors you had in the past, suffer all of these. And as you repair them, it's almost like cutting cords to things that bind us. And as we cut those cords, as we heal that, we move up to a level that's kind of beyond suffering. That's my interpretation of that. I could be wrong. I know that the fourth being Obligonian striving is to, lighten the load of our endlessness by suffering or experiencing the sorrow.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I find this a fascinating topic, the whole topic of remorse of conscience and using it to repair our past. Within Hinduism, they say only God can burn all those karmic seed particles in us. And, they will just keep on sprouting, and sprouting will cause future sprouting and stuff like that. And the divine can point the finger and just kind of melt that. And that's how we clear up our past. But here, we don't have to ask, we don't have to require, we don't have to get to a certain point where that happens. We can begin to untangle the mess ourselves. Now, we may, you got this thread all bound up tightly into a knot, and you've got to start somewhere. So to expect the knot to instantly dissolve will not happen. There's a lot of work that has to be done to dissolve those knots. So start thinking about not just your relationship with your parents, but even potentially your relationship with your grandparents. They have preceded you on your own personal and particular ray of creation. And there is an energetic link that you have with them. Mr. Gurdjieff said that there is a telepathic quality to consanguinity, to sharing blood. So my ray of creation through my parents to my grandparents, but my ray of creation also extends down to my 3 children. So this is the most productive work we can do, is to work the levels above and the levels below with remorse of conscience. Then we can also begin to experience remorse of conscience whenever we find ourselves perhaps engaging in some egocentric thought or action, self-conceit, self-praise. But we can also bring this feeling of remorse of conscience to ourselves if we realized we haven't done inner work. If we set out a task and we didn't do it, if we suddenly get to the end of the day and we realize that, we hadn't paid attention, just bringing an example that we talked about earlier, to our food and to expressing the gratitude to great nature and imagining, the people involved in the production of the food, right down to the earth herself and down to the bacteria in the soil. So we can begin to use this quality, not to beat ourselves up. If we beat ourselves up, we're doing it wrong. This has to be a force, like a laser beam that we focus in order to break up the impressions, to break up the crystallizations that have already taken place within us, to uncrystallize the specific memories, say, involved with our parents or our children, to use this power to go back into our past and repair it so that our future, so that tomorrow will not be like today, so that tomorrow will be different. So if, we set ourselves a task of becoming aware every time we picked up a set of knife and fork, and we don't do that, to try and recall what it was like to be a little child with the red face and the tears, and to recall a moment in your adult life where you did something that really had a bad effect, and to bring these feelings together and focus them like a laser beam on whatever it is, to begin to utilize this feeling. And conscience is different as well, I should say. I'm speaking of remorse of conscience. And organic shame is the stuff we, before the age of 8, and remorse is that head brain. And together, organic shame and remorse becomes remorse of conscience. And remorse of conscience itself is the force. It's different than conscience itself. Remorse of conscience is a particular feeling that arises, and this feeling we can use to go back and to repair our past. At any rate, it's now noon. I would like to thank you for coming, and sorry about those who are watching it on Facebook, and I will post this on YouTube and put it on Facebook very quickly so that they can go back and see it and learn about it. So thank you for being here. Take care, Brian. Take care, Ian. And next week, I think I'm going to talk about the difference between personality and essence, to go into that, to discuss that in a little bit more detail. Okay, take care. Bye now.
Thanks, Al.
Bye.